You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
This is going to be an extremely busy month. I have to watch 104 soccer games, follow the pregame, the postgame, yell useless opinions at the TV. It's a lot. So I knew that when it comes to screening for colon cancer, the choice was clear. The Cologuard Plus test. It can be used at home and can only take 15 minutes, so I can do it during halftime and not miss any action. If you are 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a prescription at Cologuard.com.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Mike Hughes had always raced through life. As a kid in Oklahoma City, his father instilled a love of speed in him by taking him to the car tracks, and by 12 years old, he was racing motorcycles. In the late 70s, he turned pro in the dangerous sport of ice speedway racing, in which motorcyclists sped around a frozen track on studded tires. In the 80s, he moved into mechanics, working as a crew member for NASCAR drivers. And by the 90s, he had moved to Las Vegas to chauffeur limousines. What one might expect, if his were a typical life story, is that this was when the racer began to finally slow down, maybe retire. But Mad Mike Hughes was not a typical sort of guy. He fancied himself a daredevil, like his idol, the world-famous stunt performer Evel Knievel. In fact, at Paris Auto Speedway in 2002, he managed to jump his Lincoln Town Car stretch limo more than 100 feet. It turned out to be a world record that got him in the Guinness Book. And this may have been a brilliant PR stunt by Mad Mike, who had apparently approached Guinness himself to get them interested. The fact that Hughes was beating his own record, a 75-foot jump he'd previously managed in Vegas, and the Guinness Book never had the category of limo jump before that time, seems to color the accomplishment as a stunt in more than one sense of the word. But it cannot be denied that it did launch his daredevil career. After this, he set his sights on jumping a canyon, like his idol. Knievel had tried to jump across Idaho's Snake River Canyon on a rocket-powered motorcycle he called the Sky Cycle X2. And Mad Mike would attempt to jump the Palo Duro Canyon in Texas in a homemade rocket that he called the Sky Limo. He knew the dangers, he told the press, insisting, quote, "I have a high IQ," end quote. He was no rocket scientist, though, so he had to teach himself, which at first meant library research, but later, according to him, everything he needed to know was easily found on the internet. In 2014, he successfully launched his rocket, reaching a height of 1,374 feet. He survived the landing, but the G-force he experienced greatly affected the 58-year-old man. He could not get out of bed for days, and for weeks he had to use a walker to get around. For someone with such a high IQ, who had done so much research on rocketry, he must have understood and expected these effects of gravity, which astronauts train so much to endure. It's certainly surprising, then, that a couple years afterward, he told the public that he believed the Earth was flat, or rather, quote-unquote, frisbee-shaped, and that he intended to fly higher in his rocket so that he could, quote, "see it with my own eyes, what shape this world we live on," end quote. His sentiments reflected the modern flat Earth theory tenet that the flatness of the Earth is being meticulously covered up by them, the powers that be. In 2016, when he expressed this belief, that meant more than just NASA. Quote, I'm not going to take anyone else's word for it, or NASA, or especially Elon Musk or SpaceX," end quote. If he had gone so deeply into the flat earth theory that he'd gotten to the denial of gravity, the effects of which he had personally felt, he never mentioned it. Certainly he could not have seen the curvature of the Earth, let alone its entire shape, on his previous flight, as one would need to reach an elevation of around 60,000 feet or higher. And Mad Mike knew this. Remember, he had a high IQ and had done his own research. So he intended to improve his steam-powered rocket and launch himself higher and higher, eventually reaching the von Karman line, the edge of space, where he would snap a photo of what the Earth really looked like to prove everyone wrong. With the full support of the Flat Earth community behind him, he raised the money he needed. After many delays and further fundraising, he launched again in 2018 and reached 1,875 feet. By 2020, as he launched for the third and final time, he seemed less interested in proving flat Earth theory and was marketing himself more as a daredevil. This flight was to be filmed for a television program called Homemade Astronauts. Tragically, the rocket's landing parachutes were damaged in the launch, deployed early, and were torn away in the wind. Mad Mike Hughes crash-landed and did not survive. Rather callously, some made fun of his death, suggesting that it was flat Earth theory and online misinformation that had killed him. But did he really believe in it, or was it just a clever way to get his financing? And how much of Flat Earthism is just a grift? This is Historical Blindness. I'm Nathaniel Lloyd, and I've known for a long time that rational skepticism does not pay as well as spreading conspiracy theories and grifting the public. Thank you for listening to The Shape of Things, an intellectual history of Flat Earth theory. Part 2, Stunt Performers and Grifters. Before we begin, I want to thank all my patrons on Patreon. I love researching and writing this program. I'm proud of it, and I find it fulfilling. But it's still the financial support of you patrons, far more than the meager ad revenue I bring in, that makes it possible for me to devote as much time as I do to the podcast. Patrons of the show get access to an exclusive RSS feed with ad-free versions of the show, early release of episodes, teasers, and exclusive minisodes between every main release, making this a weekly podcast for patrons. If you hear minisodes and think they're little blurbs or insubstantial sound bites, think again. They're fully researched and produced episodes, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes long, and they tie in with the main episode topics. And they even sometimes fill in the gaps and tell the rest of the story that my main episode didn't have time to tell. For example, after my series on moon landing denialism, I released a minisode talking about NASA's supposed body count, all the astronauts they supposedly murdered to cover up what they're really up to, as well as conspiracy claims about recording over moon landing footage. And after part 1 of this series on flat Earth theory, I talked about the other scam run by the founder of modern flat Earth theory, Samuel Rowbotham, who claimed to be able to cure death with the health supplement he sold. For listeners who are interested, I also sell these exclusive minisodes for just $3 a pop. So head over to patreon.com/historicalblindness and consider purchasing the occasional blind spot minisode that interests you, or supporting the podcast for as little as $1 a month. Now, let's continue the episode. Welcome to Historical Blindness. When Samuel Rowbotham's book, sometimes called the Flat Earth Bible, was finally printed in 1865, it was somewhat rushed because one of his disciples was also working on his own book, and it simply wouldn't do for the first full-fledged book to espouse and detail Rowbotham's zetetic astronomy to be written by anyone other than himself. The disciple in question, William Carpenter, is a perfect example of the very sort of fringe thinker and fad follower who is drawn to Flat Earthism. Previous to attending one of Rowbotham's lectures and being converted to the Flat Earth fold, he had been a vocal proponent of several other pseudosciences popular in those years. One was phrenology, the 18th century notion that head lumps and skull shapes could be studied to discern someone's mental faculties and character, a false notion that contributed greatly to scientific racism, as well as harmful theories about criminality and gender norms. Carpenter was also a convert to mesmerism, which we today associate with hypnotism when it was really much more than that. It did involve trances, but it was more precisely a kind of medical quackery, blaming illness on blockages of magnetic fluid that could be manipulated through quote-unquote animal magnetism by the sweeping of hands over the body, making it far more similar to energy healing pseudosciences today, like Reiki. And finally, Carpenter was a big believer in spiritualism and published his transcriptions of the seances held by a prominent medium, during which he claimed to have spoken with numerous famous ghosts, as well as to his own tragically deceased children. The same year as Rowbotham's book released, Carpenter, who owned his own press, published his book, Theoretical Astronomy Examined and Exposed, which details Rowbotham's claims, rehashes his religious arguments and supposed experimental proofs, and casts aspersions on all of Rowbotham's critics, including leading astronomers of the day, such as Sir John Herschel and the Astronomer Royal George Airy. Even in those days, flat earthers appealed to the idea that mainstream astronomy might be disproven and the true shape of the Earth discerned if we were able to reach a great enough height, which meant that they relied heavily on the first-hand reports of aeronauts or ballooners, many of whom had reported that the Earth looked not so much flat as concave from great heights. This accords well still with ancient and long disproven conceptions of the Earth as a sort of dish shape. So flat earthers saw this as a win. We understand today why the Earth may appear this way, as it's a simple matter of perspective and atmospheric refraction of light. But the claim was itself disproven by the aeronaut James Glaisher, who in 1862 reached a greater height than any human being ever had. At about 28,000 feet, he lost consciousness from lack of oxygen. It's estimated he may have reached 35,000 feet, the cruising altitude of airliners today, before his co-pilot, also losing consciousness, managed to climb the rigging and release a valve, thereby starting their descent and saving both of their lives. Glaisher reported that at that great altitude, quote, the Earth did not present a concave or cup-shaped appearance, according to the popular belief, end quote. Carpenter excoriates him, claiming that Glaisher already had the round Earth in mind and so did not recognize what he was seeing, and further arguing that since he didn't see a round Earth, which of course he wouldn't have from that elevation, his testimony nevertheless stood as proof of a flat Earth. But as loud and insistent as disciples like Carpenter may have been, Rowbotham's critics were many, among not only the scientific elite, but also among the very regular folks he tried to proselytize. His first debunker was the very secretary of the Royal Astronomical Society who had revealed that Rowbotham's paper had only been read at a meeting for entertainment purposes, as described in the previous episode. Augustus de Morgan also happened to write a weekly column for the magazine Athenaeum called A Budget of Paradoxes, in which he discussed various pseudosciences and bad scholarship, making zetetic astronomy perfect fodder. Therefore, he made a meal of it and a fool of Rowbotham early on. In 1868, after Rowbotham's and Carpenter's books appeared, the vicar of a modest church in York, Reverend Major Ryder Brescher, was shocked when many of his parishioners and other townsfolk were actually swayed by one of Rowbotham's lectures, so he wrote his own lengthy pamphlet called The Newtonian System of Astronomy, with a reply to the various objections made against it by quote-unquote parallax, in which he systematically debunked not only Rowbotham's scriptural evidence, but his scientific argument as well. In one particularly scathing line, he pointed out that Rowbotham's supposed experimental results, which we know were inconsistently described, were never actually documented. He said that the lecture attendees had paid money to receive proof that the Earth is flat, but that, quote, unless we consider the bare assertion of a nameless stranger whose information on the subjects he discusses is neither extensive nor accurate, and whose blunders would disgrace a sixth-form boy at a good grammar school to be evidence, parallax gives us none, end quote. In 1870, one J. Dyer, about whom I can find very little information beyond the names of the pamphlets he published, wrote a systematic refutation of Rowbotham called The Spherical Form of the Earth, a reply to parallax. We know he was concerned about Rowbotham's effective promotion of misinformation among the less educated. He was apparently an astronomer, at least an amateur, for his proofs often centered on astronomical evidence. The moon could not be self-luminous, as Rowbotham claimed, as anyone with a decent telescope could view the mountains on the moon and see the shadows they cast on its own surface. Dyer went through Rowbotham's claims like this as a true rational skeptic, even catching him in contradictions and outright lies. And he was the first to challenge him to reproduce one of his experiments. Rowbotham had claimed that he ran an experiment in which he lashed an air gun to a post, made certain it was perfectly level, and fired it to test the velocity of the Earth. Revealing his woefully poor understanding of gravitational theory, he reasoned that if the Earth really were traveling at 700 miles per hour, the ball fired straight upward from his gun would end up very far indeed from the barrel. But he claimed that it had twice fallen right back into the barrel. Dyer showed up at one of his lectures with an air gun and demanded he show everyone. This is, of course, a very scientific request. All valid experimental evidence must be reproducible. Rowbotham agreed and failed. But afterward, Rowbotham demanded that the gun be fired again without the air, and when the ball, propelled only by the spring-loaded pin of the firing mechanism and not by the pressurized air, emerged only barely from the barrel and fell back inside, Rowbotham managed to save face and claim he had demonstrated that the Earth was immobile. This would be only the first of many such stunts, in which flat earthers either agree to an experiment or propose one themselves, and when it does not go their way, they move the goalposts or deny the results to save face. The same year that Dyer challenged Rowbotham to reproduce his experimental results, the most famous of flat earther stunts was pulled by a new convert, John Hampton, a biblical literalist and well-off son of a clergyman, who after reading Rowbotham and Carpenter's work embraced Flat Earthism as his life's cause, personally financing the publication of further pamphlets on the topic. Seeing that the scientific community was simply ignoring them, not deigning to dignify their theory as worthy even of debunking, he put an ad out in the paper challenging, quote, all the philosophers, divines, and scientific professors in the United Kingdom to prove the rotundity and revolution of the world from scripture, from reason, or from fact, end quote, and offering a £500 reward. This sort of open challenge to refute a false claim or misinformation has since become very common, even though it's totally backward. Prove me wrong challenges like this improperly shift the burden of proof and falsely give the impression that unsupported pseudoscientific or pseudo-historical claims are equally as worthy of consideration as empirical knowledge that has already stood up to scientific scrutiny. But often a person of science will take the bait, and with real science on their side, they invariably make fools of those purveyors of nonsense. In this case, it was Alfred Russel Wallace, who had traveled around the spherical globe to collect plant and animal specimens. He was famous for having formulated the theory of evolution by natural selection simultaneously with Charles Darwin. Indeed, Darwin had to rush his book to print in order to beat Wallace to the punch and become the name forever commonly associated with this enormous scientific discovery. Wallace accepted the challenge, and Hampton chose the old Bedford Canal as the location, confident that Robotham himself had already performed experiments there proving the Earth was flat. Wallace agreed, proposing they set up level markers at the water's edge at every mile, which should all align by telescope, compensating for atmospheric refraction if the Earth really were level. Hampton agreed to the validity of such an experiment, assigning William Carpenter to act as his surrogate and attend the experiment to ensure it was conducted as stated. Wallace demonstrably proved the convexity of the water and therefore the curvature of the Earth by observing that the center markers actually rose above the end markers, revealing the rise or bump of the curve. Carpenter hemmed and hawed, complained about the telescope's leveling and its crosshairs, forced the experiment to be conducted from both boat and bridge, moved the goalposts over and over, and in the end simply denied that the rise of the central marker proved anything. Impartial judges were appealed to, and they all found in Wallace's favor. But since Carpenter refused to accept the results, Hampton was unconvinced and reneged on his gentleman's bet. Thereafter, he published his claims that Wallace and the judges had cheated, calling it the Bedford Swindle. In fact, over the next few years, he was convicted of libel 3 times and was court-ordered more than once to make public apologies to Wallace in the newspapers. Now for a brief intermission.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Picture this. Me, Reese Witherspoon, in London, ordering fish and chips so often they might start wrapping me in paper. I'm traveling with my Wells Fargo Autograph Journey card, so I earn rewards wherever I book travel. 5 times points with hotels, 4 times with airlines, 3 times on restaurants and other travel, and 1 point on other purchases. Imagine getting rewarded for eating a toad in the hole. Wait, what is a toad in a hole?
Visit wellsfargo.com/autographjourney. Terms apply.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
Now, back to the show. Despite the failure of Hampton's Prove Me Wrong challenge, despite Wallace positively proving the convexity of the Earth's surface and Hampton being held accountable for lying about the results of the experiment in a court of law, the Flat Earth movement thrived, perhaps because the controversy brought them more attention, which is exactly the point of such stunts. In the pages of a monthly flat Earth journal called The Zetetic that commenced publication in 1872, Rowbotham suggested that he could reconduct his experiments at Bedford and prove Wallace wrong. But that never happened, and eventually Rowbotham began to shift his focus back toward selling his syrup of phosphorus cure-all, which apparently had a better return on investment than selling his books, pamphlets, and magazines. It's an old story that we see repeated today. Purveyors of misinformation gather an audience with their false claims, but they monetize them by selling that audience fake health and wellness supplements. In 1879, William Carpenter moved to America, where he helped grow the infant Zetetic societies that had been founded here. By the 1890s, after both Samuel Rowbotham and John Hampton died, Flat Earthism was still strong in numbers, but in total disarray, until the founding of a new organization, the Universal Zetetic Society, bankrolled by its aristocratic leader, Lady Elizabeth Blount. Lady Blount led the movement into the 20th century and made every effort to continue publishing pamphlets and providing further experimental evidence at the old Bedford Canal, even though Wallace's experiment was reproduced in 1901, further proving the convexity of the canal waters across that same 6-mile stretch that Rowbotham had always claimed was level. In 1904, Lady Blount conducted her own experiment, hiring a photographer to use a telephoto lens and spy out the bottom edge of a white sheet that she'd hung from a bridge 6 miles distant, hanging just above the water's surface. The resulting photo, which she claimed proved the Earth's flatness, was published in a prominent English science magazine and roundly mocked. For like many photos claiming to prove outlandish things, like the existence of Bigfoot or flying saucers, it was too blurry to make out much of anything. More than that, her experimental results, already in doubt, could not be reproduced, and using a more precise optical instrument, the theodolite, actually showed the opposite, that the bottom of the sheet was not visible. Further canal experiments at Bedford and elsewhere continued to demonstrate the convexity of the waters. Their results were regularly published in science magazines and newspapers, standing as the strongest modern experimental evidence for the sphericity of the Earth until 1946, when the first photos of Earth were taken from space. After Lady Blount married in 1923, she became less active, and the Universal Zetetic Society and British Flat Earthism generally began to decline. And across the Atlantic in the US, where William Carpenter had fanned its flames until his death in 1896, the early Zetetic societies also waned. But seeds had been planted, and by the 20s, a new champion of the falsehood had arisen, standing once again upon the foundation of biblical literalism. Wilbur Voliva was the head of the Christian Catholic Apostolic Church, which was not really Catholic, and he ruled over the church's town in Illinois called Zion like a despot over an island nation, directing his own pet police force to arrest anyone who smoked tobacco or used profanity or even ate oysters or pork. Women were forbidden from showing their necks, were not allowed to cut their hair, and were outlawed from riding a horse in any fashion other than side saddle. Voliva ran men of science out of town, from druggists to doctors, and he preached against the evils of both evolution and establishment astronomy. A dyed-in-wool flat earther, he succeeded where Rowbotham had failed by making flat earthism a central tenet of his little cult, requiring that any member of his church and resident of his town believe in the flatness of the world. One sign he erected there made this clear enough, stating, quote, "No one except a low-down scoundrel, a person lower than the dirtiest dog, yes, lower down than a skunk, would call the earth a globe in Zion City," end quote. And he spread the word about the shape of the world on the airwaves, as in 1923 he became the first evangelical minister to own his own broadcast station. On his program, he espoused all the flat earth dogma of a flat and stationary earth hemmed in by a great ice wall, beyond which, Voliva asserted, was Hades. As for the sun and moon, they were closer, smaller, circling over the disk of the world. All of his logic he based on his creationist worldview, calling the idea of a huge and faraway sun, quote-unquote, silly, explaining, quote, God made the sun to light the earth and therefore must have placed it close to the task it was designed to do. What would you think of a man who built a house in Zion and put the lamp to light it in Kenosha, Wisconsin? End quote. He followed in Hampton's footsteps too, offering $5,000 to anyone who could prove the earth was round. No public challenge ever resulted from this, however, as Voliva simply never accepted any challengers. He claimed to have received numerous letters offering the many long-standing proofs of the Earth's sphericity, and he simply threw them out, saying that they all showed, quote, an appalling ignorance of the whole subject, end quote. The denialism here is plain and boldface. The prove me wrong crowd simply want to look like they are open to refutation, but reject all rebuttals without truly considering them. And of course, it helped Voliva that he had his own version of empirical knowledge, in that he was standing on the shoulders of Rowbotham, Carpenter, and Hampton, and therefore had a bad answer and a false proof to throw at nearly any objection raised. Voliva died in 1942, only 4 years before a photo of the spherical Earth was taken from outer space. But before he died, he became pen pals with a young man named Charles Johnson, who would end up becoming the modern leader of the Flat Earth movement and would have to contend with the further conclusive evidence provided by the age of space exploration. Charles Johnson was born to a poor cowpoke family with a hard-scrabble upbringing in Texas. By his telling, when he was first shown a globe in school, he scoffed over how all the people would fall off such a thing and refused to accept the teacher's explanation of gravity through the metaphor of centrifugal force keeping water inside a pail when one wheels it around. So he dropped out, and like most other major flat Earth figures, taught himself. Did his own research, as it were. By 18, we know he had discovered and sought to learn more about organized Flat Earthism, since he wrote to Voliva about it. But for much of his life, Johnson just traveled around the U.S., working various blue-collar jobs, supporting himself and eventually his wife as an airplane mechanic. This is rather funny to me that he was in aviation, which meant he must have known something about Great Circle navigation, something I spoke about in the first episode this year. And that in itself proves the sphericity of the Earth. In the late 60s, he heard that another blue-collar guy, Samuel Shenton, a sign painter, had officially reorganized the Zetetic Society in Dover, England, calling it now the International Flat Earth Society. Shenton was one of the first flat earthers who had to actually contend with the revelations of the space age. The press loved to have fun with him, asking him pointed questions about orbiting satellites, photos from space, and even manned space capsules carrying people into low Earth orbit. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin in 1961 and astronaut John Glenn in 1962. Shenton's answer was much the same as the old response to questions of the globe's circumnavigation. These satellites and capsules weren't in space. There was no space beyond the firmament dome, only the seven heavens. But rather, they simply circled over the disk of the Earth. How they could have done this without escaping the gravity of the Earth was not addressed. I assume because it would require acknowledging the truth of gravitational law, which is and has always been a sticking point for flat earthers. Shenton's Flat Earth Society never did well in England, But after his death in 1971, Charles Johnson inherited the presidency of the organization, headquartered it in California, and built it into the discouragingly successful organization that it remains today. Of course, as discussed in my previous series, his job was made easier by the work of Bill Kaysing, the moon landing denialist. Johnson had 100 years of flat Earth talking points to throw at nearly any objection a rational skeptic or scientific-minded doubter might throw at him. But the space program had been providing more and more unassailable proof of the Earth's sphericity. Therefore, Kaysing's work suggesting NASA was faking everything became another foundational talking point of flat earthers under Johnson, much to Kaysing's dismay. Flat Earthism had long involved some conspiracism, though much of it suggested that conventional astronomy was just wrong or stuck in a confirmation bias. There had always been claims that some men of science were consciously deceiving the public. Some early flat earthers claimed that certain scientific instruments were manufactured with inherent flaws that made their findings unreliable. And when pointed out that it's unlikely all manufacturers would make the same errors, conspiracy thinking was resorted to, as is usually the case in denialism. But it wasn't until Johnson that the Flat Earth movement became a truly conspiracist movement. He asserted that it was not just NASA that had faked the moon landings, but that there existed a vast conspiracy, a shadowy power group who knew that the Earth was flat, but conspired to pretend it was round anyway. By his telling, all space agencies, all militaries, all governments, and even all the world's scientists were all faking evidence of the Earth's sphericity, hiding the reality of the firmament dome, pretending Antarctica is real and denying the great ice wall's existence. Why? He gave many different reasons. It was to lead the world away from a biblical worldview and into atheism, or it was to keep the public trusting their expertise and keep them feeling insignificant in order to exert control, or it was just to create intellectual jobs for quote-unquote Kennedy Democrats, who were otherwise, in his opinion, unemployable. In the future, though, they would reveal the truth of the flat Earth. In fact, he believed they almost did so after World War II with the Organization of the United Nations, because their seal resembled the flat Earth map. Interestingly, while developing this right-wing biblical literalist conspiratorial worldview, Johnson actually tried to move away from the religious angle toward a more scientific worldview. According to him, quote, "We don't quote scriptures, though we mention that the Bible is a flat earth book. We concentrate on the evidence," end quote. Of course, this was simply lip service, much like all the quote-unquote Zetetics before him, claiming to be men and women of real science when they were always only science deniers. Except Johnson hated the word science, thinking it just as much a religion as anything else. He claimed that, quote, "In order to be a scientist, you have to give up all desire for truth and facts. It's not flat earth science, but flat earth facts that we have," end quote. And he faulted creationists for adhering to the spherical earth, for picking and choosing what biblical literalism they promoted, and for trying to present creationism as a science, seeking equal time instead of seeking to entirely explode the scientific worldview. Indeed, there are many parallels to be made between flat earth theory and the flood geology of creationists. But certainly creationists have been far more successful in spreading their brand of science denial than have flat earthers, at least until the advent of the internet and social media. Charles Johnson died in 2001, and before he passed, he would have been witness to the successful growth of flat earthism online. A 2018 poll showed around 4% of Americans believed the earth flat, and 7% expressed a lack of certainty. But as with belief in the moon landing, the numbers are higher among younger millennials, only around 66% of whom were certain the Earth was round. Another survey in 2021 recorded an astonishing 10% of respondents agreeing the Earth is flat. Much of this growth can be traced to the modern Flat Earth movement, which is full of social media grifters. Now, it should be said that Charles Johnson really did seem to be a true believer. I don't know enough about Samuel Shenton to say, but he may have been honest in his science denial as well. Even Lady Blount may have squinted at her blurry photo and really believed she'd proven the Earth flat. But the history of Flat Earthism is steeped in grift. As we've seen, Samuel Rowbotham was a snake oil salesman who appears to have falsified his experiments. Likewise, William Carpenter's undermining of the Bedford Level experiment suggests he was purposely attempting to sabotage the debunking of the theory upon which he'd built his livelihood. In America, Wilbur Voliva was certainly a grifter. Regardless of whether he really believed in the Earth's flatness, he used it and his other doctrines to control the residents of Zion City, keeping them poor and embezzling a fortune from them during the Great Depression, something he would later give a tearful apology about, much like any modern-day social media grifter who gets caught in their wrongdoing. With the advent of the internet, it becomes crystal clear that just as many charlatans are drawn to exploit religion for their own gain, and many religious people are drawn through a dogmatic misinformation pipeline into Flat Earthism, so too many con artists today are drawn to become Flat Earth influencers. Mad Mike Hughes, the daredevil rocketeer I discussed in the beginning of this episode, was one such scammer. By all accounts, he was a really great guy, but it does appear that he espoused Flat Earthism specifically to raise money. This means he was scamming flat earthers, but at the same time he was espousing and thus magnifying Flat Earthism, so it's tough to really cheer this on. He started doing it in 2016, right after a failed fundraising attempt only collected $300 or so. And once the Flat Earth angle stopped garnering him as much money, he left it by the wayside, insisting his rocket launch stunts were never really about proving the Earth was flat. In fact, according to his own PR rep, quote, "We used Flat Earth as a PR stunt. I know he didn't believe in a flat Earth, and it was a shtick," end quote. And he would not be the last to exploit the Flat Earth community for money. That same year, rap artist B.O.B. went on social media espousing Flat Earth talking points and posting photos of the horizon as if it were proof of the Earth's flatness. When science communicator and astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson responded in an effort to fight his misinformation, B.O.B. produced a diss track about Tyson, and Tyson's nephew, a rapper, produced a response diss track in one of the most hilariously absurd hip-hop rivalries ever. Afterward, B.O.B. resorted to grift, launching a crowdfunding effort to raise $200,000 to launch his own satellite that would, quote, "find the curve," end quote. When money started coming in to his GoFundMe, he increased his goal to $1 million. He only ever raised about $7,000, but among his donors were also skeptics who know the Earth is round and just relished the idea of proving it to B.O.B. Likewise, in 2021, a Scottish man started a similar GoFundMe to send a prominent flat earther into space aboard a SpaceX or Virgin Galactic flight, thinking that might be all it takes to shut these idiots up once and for all. Unfortunately, it only ever raised £345, even though you'd think flat earthers would have donated to this campaign as well. This is not the only example of the critics of Flat Earthism relying on the same tactics as flat earthers. I spoke about the long-standing prove me wrong stunt that flat earthers resort to in their efforts to legitimize their beliefs and flip the script on science. There has been plenty of that in more recent years as well. One flat earth YouTuber who calls himself Flat Out Hero reasoned correctly that if the Earth was flat, as he claims, then an airplane would not be able to take a flight path that creates an equilateral triangle with two right angles. Such a shape is impossible in 2 dimensions, but is possible on a sphere because of its curvature. However, when another YouTuber who was a pilot took him up on his challenge and proved that it could be done, thereby proving the sphericity of the Earth yet again, flat-out hero refused to pay. Like Robotham, Carpenter, and Hampton before him, he moved the goalposts, making complaints about the charts the pilot used. Consensus seems to be that he didn't even have the money and never intended to pay up, which would make his challenge nothing more than a publicity stunt and a scam. On the other side of things, though, we have Tim Boyle, the CEO of Columbia Sportswear, who promised to give his entire company to any flat earther who could prove their claims by venturing to Antarctica and the edge of the world to finally get photographic evidence of what they claim is there. Of course, this was a publicity stunt too, part of an ad campaign called Expedition Impossible, boasting that the flat earthers would need to wear Columbia gear as they ventured out to that frozen abyss beyond the ice wall. But like the effort to launch flat earthers into space, it's one that everyone, skeptic and flat earther, should be able to get behind. Why can't we make this happen? This seems like an obvious premise for a Nat Geo show. Put up the money to fly prominent flat earther mouthpieces over Antarctica and into space. Have Neil deGrasse Tyson interview them afterward. Whether it's just to marvel at their mental gymnastics or to see their conversion and contrition, I'd watch that show. Thanks for listening to Historical Blindness. As always, special thanks go out to my partner patrons, Diane Lane, Joe Escott, Devlin Hoff, Lisa, Prickly Pear, Fred R. Grotice, Robin Naggett, Don Mundus, Eunice Allen Bradley, Juliette O'Connor, Jonathan Williams, Joshua Luddington, Christine LeBlanc, Lonnie C., Kaylee, Ama, Christopher L. Burton, Benny Slater, Chris BDG, Jocelyn Clausen, Lindsay McAllister, Brian, Jamie Nielsen, Martin Robistow, Josh Haberman, and AJ. Thanks for all your support, patrons. I really appreciate you, partner patrons. I think of you as the central supporting pillars of this program. I'm not crowdfunding to produce any specific product. I don't promise you a cure-all or a sensational stunt. I still need to send out some copies of my historical novel to a few of you. But all of you partner patrons support at such a generous tier simply because you really appreciate what I'm doing, and that is greatly encouraging. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows, like The Constant and Who Did What Now. Some music on this episode was licensed through a Blue Dot Sessions blanket license at the time of the episode's publication. Additional music is by Kai Engel and by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Check out the show notes for a list of the tracks used. You can support the show by pledging on Patreon or by making a one-time donation on PayPal. Find those links in the show notes or find me on Venmo at Historical Blindness. Until next time, I'll leave you with the following quotation, which describes Flat Earthism quite well. Quote, "They have never made a single experiment the truth of which can be incontestably proved, and they stick to their insane theory because it is ingenious and makes thoughtless blockheads stare with amazement. One single proof would be worth 1,000 mere assertions." End quote. This, ironically, is what John Hampton had to say about, quote-unquote, those who assert the Earth to be a globe.
This episode is brought to you by Google Health. Stop chasing someone else's definition of health. What matters is what's healthy for you. Google Health offers a new kind of coach built with Gemini for effortless tracking, sleep insights, and holistic coaching tailored to you. Visit googlestore.com to learn more and start a new relationship with your health. Requires Google account, Google Health app, internet, and Google Health premium subscription. Features subject to change. Availability and results vary. Not intended for medical purposes. Works independently of Gemini apps. Check responses for accuracy.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Sleep Cove podcast can help you. Hi, I'm Christopher Fitton, the voice and clinical hypnotherapist behind Sleep Cove. Sleep Cove features sleep hypnosis, meditations, and bedtime stories, all designed to help those of you who struggle at night to achieve a restful and peaceful night's sleep. Search for Sleep Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see why Sleep Cove helps millions of people sleep deeply all night long.
Hey there, I'm Travis Hoyam, one of the hosts of Motley Fool Hidden Gems Investing. Each weekday on Motley Fool Hidden Gems Investing, we talk through the business news you need to know and the stories moving stocks on Wall Street. On weekends, we game plan personal finance strategies and dive into the industries shaping tomorrow and host the experts, authors, and executives that understand them. Tune in for insights and a long-term perspective on investing and, of course, stock ideas, plenty of them. To quote a listener, it pays to listen. Check us out and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.